This is the North Mobile Post Radio Show, and I am your host, David Merrill. Today's big news, the jobs report that came out yesterday. The U.S. economy created 96,000 new jobs, and the unemployment rate fell from 8.3 to 8.1%. Now, to dive into that data a little deeper, the 96,000 jobs, that is actually below economists' expectations. That is not a great number for the U.S. economy. Economists think we need about 120,000 jobs a month just to keep up with population growth. Now, they've actually revised that down. They say even maybe 90,000 jobs is enough to keep up with population growth due to so many people falling out of the workforce from retirement and whatnot. But anyway, slice it, the numbers aren't great. They're not horrible, but they're not great. We really, at this point, for the economy to be growing, we want 200,000 plus jobs created as they were at the beginning of this year in the first quarter. Now, as for the reason why the unemployment rate fell despite that low number of jobs being created, the reason for that is because a lot of people stopped looking for work or just dropped out of the workforce altogether. And I personally think, I don't have the data, like I said, to look deep into this, and I'm not sure if even the government has this kind of information. We've been seeing, this is a trend we've been seeing all year, that it seems people are dropping out of the workforce, and I don't think it's just people giving up looking for work. It's not like you can just give up looking for work. People have to have jobs to, live. There's only so much you can do from government assistance without any type of work. I think it's, and I'm not going to say this is all the reason for the workforce dropping, but I think retirements, we keep talking about the baby boomers are about to retire. Well, we are already into that period, I believe. I think we may have reached the peak of the employment in this country, the peak employment numbers in terms of total people employed in this past decade, and it's not going to reach those heights again. I think, the retirement of the baby boomers, I believe, has begun. And, some people took early retirement just because the job market was so weak. And plus, just some baby boomers are now 65, or they're getting there. So I definitely think the U.S. workforce is going to shrink over the coming years somewhat, unless we have an explosion of population growth. So people dropping out of the workforce, that's why the rate came down. And plus, the jobs numbers and the unemployment rate, those are two totally different figures. They're figured separately, so they don't always match. Sometimes when you don't add a lot of jobs, the rate still drops, as this situation. So, and I have an article up on the blog today, on why the economic growth is so slow. And I go into several different reasons why. I read a pretty good article over at the New York Times, and they discussed government job creation. It pointed out, it was a really good article, very in depth, how in the last few recessions, specifically looking at the 1990 recession and the 2001 recession, the 1990 recession, it took, I believe, 32 months to recover back to the employment before the recession, and in the 2001 recession, it took 48. And what the point of that article is about government jobs. In those recessions, the government started creating jobs pretty quickly after the recession hit. And in this current recession, we are actually losing jobs still, I believe. And we've lost over 600,000 government jobs since President Obama took office. So, and if you factor in if government job growth had been in this recession like it had been in previous recessions, there would be over 1 million extra jobs added to the market, nearly 2 million according to the last recession, the way jobs grew after that from the government. But that would drop unemployment rate closer to between 7 and 7.3%. So government job losses are really hurting this economy. And that's not something you're going to hear from Republicans. As a matter of fact, Mitt Romney is calling for more spending cuts, more austerity measures in his economic plan. He wants tax cuts. He wants to cut government spending, of course, cut back regulations. But the most important thing really is the cut to government spending. If he cuts spending, and we see the effects of austerity now at the state level, most of these job losses are at the state level, that could be a disaster economically. And you're seeing the same thing in Europe. They're having a sovereign debt crisis. Their government debt is just, it's haywire over there. They've a lot of the governments, like Greece, I think Ireland, Spain, Italy, having a lot of issues with their debt, and their interest rates are going up. And they have begun to implement austerity measures as a counter. To get bailed out, they had to go through austerity measures, and that's putting them even worse off. They're going further in debt because of it. You cut spending, and your economy goes to crap. So, probably not a good idea. That's one thing that is very dangerous in Mitt Romney's economic plan, is the spending cuts in an already fragile economy. He would argue that his tax cuts will stimulate the economy, but the effectiveness of tax cuts as a stimulative measure are inconclusive. There's a lot of argument over it, but I think most would agree they're not. It's not going to cause explosive growth. Now, another thing, one factor as a theory I haven't dug into the data and can't, prove it with data yet, but one theory I have is outsourcing or offshoring, whatever you want to call it. I believe the technical term is offshoring. I think that has is a major factor in the current problems with recovery, and I think the data sort of shows that. If you look at the 1990 recession, we recovered in 32 months. In 2001, as offshoring became more popular and jobs started going overseas, it took longer. It took 48 months. This time around, I think we're at 88 months, and we haven't, as more and more jobs have been offshored since then. These are roughly 10 years apart, and you can see it's taking longer and longer to recover from recessions. And people forget, this recession has been so bad, people forget the 2001 recession. But I remember distinctly they were calling it a jobless recovery when the economy started to pick up. The stock market started shooting up. The rich were doing great. The stocks, like I said, stocks were going up, but jobs weren't there. And they were calling it a jobless recovery. Now, we did end up, getting to a lower unemployment rate. It was around 5%, I believe, at its height in the Bush years. But demand wasn't that great. They were a lot of people, you saw stories on the news all the time, if you watched your local news or even national news, of people who used to work in plants were now taking jobs as like manager of Home Depot or something like that. So, and the thing is, that was, it was kind of covered in the last decade during the Bush years because of home equity. Because of the real estate bubble, people had so much value in their house that they could take out these home equity loans, and it didn't matter if you made half the salary you used to make, because you just had what people thought was free cash from their home equity loans. Well, of course, the real estate crash and the financial crash destroyed that wealth, so that's no longer an option to a lot of people. Home values went down. A lot of people are underwater in their mortgages, or they've went into foreclosure. So that's another reason why this recovery is not as good as the last one. That home equity, get out of jail free card is not there anymore. So without high paying jobs, without home equity, it's just the economy's a mess. And this is a consumer driven economy. When you have people that don't have any money in their pockets, the economy is going to struggle, because we need people out buying things, buying goods, buying services. If they're not, this is what you get. You have slow growth. And our economy is dominated by the service sector, and that's just not going to cut it in this country. We can't, of course we need service sector workers, but we also need a manufacturing base, a factory base. We need those high paying, what you call low skill jobs that, people used to get back in the 50s and 60s. You get right out of high school. If you don't go to college, you go to work in a factory. You make a living wage. You can go out then and, supply the money needed for these service sector jobs. But we can't have an economy that is all service sector jobs. They just don't pay enough to really power this economy. And and that's where I believe, like I said, the trade issue comes in with the jobs being offshored. And people who want to defend it will say, oh, the cheaper goods, that puts more money in people's pockets and they can, buy more stuff and blah, blah, blah. Well, what they miss is that Sure, that's true. If you're living in a vacuum of only buying, stuff from Walmart, the cheap goods made overseas, sure, that's great. People do have more money to spend at Walmart. But, we can't offshore, unfortunately, our gas prices. The offshore in those jobs made lower salaries over here, so sure they can afford the cheap goods made in China, but they can't afford gas now. And then you look at healthcare. Price of healthcare has been skyrocketing. They can't afford healthcare anymore. Food prices now, thanks to these droughts in the Midwest, can't afford food anymore. So sure, the price of goods has gone down, but the price of more essential products, fuel, healthcare, food, they've all gone up. So we're really feeling the pain now of these low-paying jobs that have replaced the good-paying jobs we used to have. All this adds up, and just, this is why our economy is weak. Cuts in government jobs, cuts in private sector jobs, or, less paying private sector jobs. That all adds up, and you get what we have now. Weak demand, weak recovery, and something has to be done externally, I believe, to fix that. Obama already took a stab at it with the first stimulus bill, which now, a lot of economists, especially liberal economists, say was far too small. The original proposal for the stimulus was close to $2 trillion, but it was declined because they said it wasn't, politically feasible. It looks like they probably should have done that. They say the stimulus that was passed, the $700 billion stimulus, saved or created over 3 million jobs. Imagine what we could have done with $2 trillion. And, Obama sort of, I guess, sees the error of his ways in that regard, as he has pushed a new stimulus plan called the American Jobs Act, which is far smaller, but I think it's more targeted. It would be more infrastructure spending, probably some more money to the states to hopefully offset some of those government job losses I talked about earlier. I think something like that is needed. Is it going to happen? Not a chance in hell. There's just no way that happens. Nothing's going to happen this year. We've got the election coming up, and you might as well consider Washington's non-existent until after the election. There'll be some work done in the lame duck session, but I think that'll mostly focus on the Bush tax cuts and extending them either for just the middle class and lower income earners or for everybody. So that ain't going to happen and after the election, Republicans are probably going to at least hold the House, if not win the Senate, and possibly the White House. So with that off the table, the only other option we really have, and what's probably going to happen in the next week or so, is monetary stimulus from the Federal Reserve. And that means QE3, basically printing more money. That's not the best situation. That's not, Fed Chairman Ben Bernanke has said he doesn't want to go to his last bullet in the gun yet. He would prefer action from Congress, but with Congress just being useless, he's going to have no choice. And the the Federal Reserve, their job is to keep unemployment low and to control inflation. That is in their, that's what they're there for. So with Congress inactive and with unemployment still stubbornly high, the Fed will probably act and should probably act. And we'll have to see, that's not going to happen. Nothing's going to happen in time to really change the election. It's, employment is a lagging indicator. Unemployment will go down later from whatever the Fed does. But they do believe the two previous versions of quantitative easing they did created a couple of million jobs. So hopefully they will push that forward and it will work again as it has in the past. Well, that's going to wrap it up for today's show. Tune back in. We'll be back Monday with a new episode, and we'll see you then.